Doki Doki Literature Club. A game that came out of nowhere, surprised everyone with its success, even the creator himself, and now had a re-release with a updated version of the game with a bunch more Easter eggs on top of the original ones that were there before, and a whole new mystery to solve. Hey internet, AKATheSKay here, and if you're new around here, well, I'll give you a proper introduction in another video. But what I will tell you is I played Doki Doki Literature Club before most of the rest of the internet did, and that's in no small part thanks to some awesome friends who told me about it. I don't know the lore inside and out, but I know a lot, and I've seen how far this game has come, and I'm not sure if I like it. I was never that interested in the mystery, but since these Easter eggs are so integral to the future of this brand, I'm going to have a look at them today, in the way that will probably get things done in the quickest way possible. Telling you why Patt is wrong. I'm gonna regret this, aren't I? Don't get angry with me just yet, because this is also a reaction video. No, wait, that doesn't help either. What if I was to tell you that this reaction video actually has editing and it isn't just a copy of the video? Okay, now I'm annoying the reaction community. Let's just get on with this already.
So, if it's been a minute, or several million minutes, since you last thought about the game when it first came out back in, 2017.
God, time is going too fast.
You're the newest member of the high school literature club, where you build relationships with 4 girls who are all definitely, most assuredly, 18 years old.
Anime joke.
One by one, the other characters fall away until you're left alone, with just Monika. Monika reveals that she'd somehow seen the truth, that she'd known this was a game all along because she'd been granted a higher level of access to the game's code. Her tampering with sliders in the background caused the other girls to die, just so she could be the one left with you.
Now let's put a noteboard pin in that detail, because we'll come back to that.
So, how do you stop her? Well, by beating her at her own game. You have to go into the files for the game and delete her character file, a technique that she's been using against all the others since the start. In a series of 2 episodes we did after the initial game's release, we dug deeper into the game's files, finding clues hidden throughout the various poems and dialogue. We discovered files that could be converted to different formats, like PDFs and text files. We ran codes through base64 converters.
Massive thanks to Reddit for figuring most of all that out and doing the heavy lifting, by the way. Well, I mean, someone should be thanking you for it.
Audio file. That QR code led us to a website hinting at something called Project Libitina, an experiment that was trying to train people to open their third eye, which we come to learn turns them into killing machines. And if that seems a bit random and disconnected, it's the exact story that's hinted at in Doki Doki's main game, when you speak to Yuri about the book that she's been reading, The Portrait of Markov. That was Monika's character file that was the most interesting, hiding a note for us that suggested they all might come from a different game entirely, and that Monika, rather than being the villain, would actually be the hero of any new sequel to come out of the series.
I know that this isn't my only story, and I think everyone else has had the same kind of experience, some kind of deja vu. I think you might be able to go back, or however you want to put it, to go back and tell them what's going to happen. If they knew ahead of time, they should be able to avoid it. If they remember their time with me in the other worlds, they should remember what I tell them. This is my story. It's time to be an effing hero. 28.
So, what kind of hero deletes their friends, even if their friends aren't real? There's only 2 ways that could happen. She either realized something by the end of the game she didn't already know, or there's multiple versions of Monika that all have different understandings of what's going on. I mean, there's multiple universes, why can't you have multiple copies of the characters?
The first feature that stands out on the desktop of DDLC Plus are the side stories. These unlock as you complete poems for specific characters throughout the main game of DDLC. We watch as they form the literature club, develop friendships, but there are a few things that stand out. First, we, the player, aren't in the game anymore. We just watch the stories unfold with no interaction or choice. They're just that, they're visual novels. Secondly, Monika isn't acting in the way that we're used to. Instead, she seems to be normal. Digging deeper through the desktop system, you find a nested series of empty file folders, each one numbered from 0 to 5. In this file, we're given a clue: 240, clock time, 221. Immediately, this starts to give us our code. Navigate through the folders, 2, 2, then 1, to find a file hidden at the end. In this case, project plan. And then you adjust the time on your device to 240 in order for that to open. Those 3-number codes plus a time are hidden in every nook and cranny of this game. Like when you unlock the file Track 6 Name Ideas, it gives you explicitly the code 030, but you don't have a time. You have to go to the song library after completing the main game, and the song matches the name of a song with his name ideas. The story focuses on a group of people working for Metaverse Enterprises, Ro, Ravi, Lib, Ive, and Paula, who, based on information in multiple files, seems to be maintaining a side project in order to save their jobs. In the file ddlc.txt, we learn their team name. Quote, I want a cool team name, something like Team Salvation? Team Salvation, or how about Team Salvato? Seems like our real-world game makers may have just actually become a part of the game's lore. But the funny thing is, it seems like
Metaverse has become a pretty big buzzword lately, and one side effect of that, especially in this series, seems to be multiple fourth wall breaks and confusing concepts of how many realities are there. They believe they're in a simulation, and by creating their own simulations in a computer, they think hopefully maybe one day they'll be able to control their own destiny in this world.
Benchmark results, suggesting we live in a simulated universe. So it seems like the team's plan is to create a series of simulated worlds with characters that they can watch to learn what people do when they're in a simulation in order to identify whether or not they themselves live in a simulation. They call the simulations they're creating VMs, or virtual machines. And the description for the first of these, VM1, should sound a bit familiar. Quote, a small-scale simulation with literature assets for easy data collection, 4 entities, characters, and a small physical space. It's our Doki Doki crew, which means that we were right. Monica is an AI. Technically, all the girls are. But we also learn how Monica got her powers. In that same project plan file, it explicitly talks about observing the effects of elevated access knowledge of simulation. What this tells us is that basically the Team Salvato crew gave one of their simulated characters, Monica, the knowledge that she's in a simulation to see what she does with it, what motivates her, what it does to her psyche. However, what good is an experiment without a control group? Remember all those odd things I said about the side stories in the game? How there's no player character, how it's not connected to the main story, how Monica seems normal? Well, that is our control group, another iteration of the VM1 simulation where Monica doesn't discover her powers. There are a couple of emails and text files that help us prove this. The first, meeting notes 2.txt, mentions the following: clone VM1, same elevated access, but prevent the entity from discovering it. The entity obviously being Monica. Meeting notes 3 also confirms the side stories to be the control group, stating, quote, snapshot slightly earlier in time, compare end control sim to start of VM1, which lines up perfectly with the side stories ending with the creation of the literature club before the start of the main game in DDLC. And if that wasn't enough evidence for you, Rhea, another member of the team, outright tells us in the email side stories, quote again, just to clarify, all the recordings labeled side stories are part of the controlled simulation, right? And again, in this same email, we once again get a reference to the unreality of their own world. Scrolling down a bit further, so if I'm keeping track, we have what, like 5 different universes in total, with 3 or 4 of them created and then destroyed by Monica, of course. It's funny because I keep wanting to speculate on which one is the real universe, but in reality, they all are. As real as ours is anyway. But what about the player? Why are we not a part of that control group? The absence of a player seems odd, even to the team. Quote from the email, character discrepancy. Having run the control simulation for a while, it's evident that a certain character is missing from any mention or appearance. This makes me speculate that Monica's meddling is less clumsy than we think, because she would have had to manufacture this character herself as a way of forcing interaction between her and the user. Once you get this email, you unlock a concept drawing in the gallery for none other than the player character, Monica.
This video has quite a bit of computer lingo, so I'll try and explain this quickly. What they're referring to when they say a snapshot is like when you create a save file on a video game, or to put it another way, Groundhog Day. Every day he wakes up at the start of the same day. That snapshot would be that moment in time, forever preserved, and everything within that. Which, in a sense, isn't that kind of what files are? You're creating an environment, and then you're just storing and saving it in that moment. These multiverses and everything are basically additional copies of that file with various things done to them. However, this is where the lore is getting a bit confusing, and I'm starting to lose track with Patt here. I don't know if I agree. To say that she created the player character also implies the fact that she made the dating sim, which makes no sense. Because what is she frustrated about throughout the entire game? The fact that everyone else gets a romantic happy ending and she doesn't. That can't be something of her own creation. It makes no sense that she would do that. Now, that's not to say a third party or another copy of Monica didn't necessarily do it, but this is all a bunch of breadcrumb clues. We don't have the full story, we just have a few pieces of a jigsaw that we're trying to force together. And honestly, I think a lot of that is intentional because they're trying to create a kind of fan engagement similar to what happened with games like Dark Souls and Five Nights at Freddy's, giving you some of the answers but not all the answers because the players have to figure out everything else themselves for research, hacking the game, or literally waiting for the next game to come out for more clues. Fan engagement in your product in 2021 and beyond is pretty much crucial if you want to stay relevant. Because let's be real here, what gets people talking more? A story in a universe where they give you all the answers, or ones where they leave mysteries for the fans to figure out?
Our theory that Monica shares memories with the Monica from the other game, or to use this new game's terminology, the other virtual machine VM2, is confirmed in an email from DDLC Plus. Quote, has anyone evaluated the side effects that might be caused by sharing a memory pool between multiple VMs rather than allocating them separately? I'm looking at some of the files VM1 is generating, and I'm finding some information that definitely shouldn't be there. My best guess is that memory being freed from VM2 isn't getting zeroed out, which technically gives VM1 access to it. So, Monica is able to see into VM2, seeing the horrors that befall her friends over in the Project Libitina simulation, and she wants to help them, but how do you do that when you're trapped in a video game? Well, you break out of the game. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that Monica is pulling a William Afton glitch trap move and has hijacked someone's body to do it. But
Poggers! Wait, no, that actually makes no sense. Based on what?
I've Laster. That whole speech of hers that we found hidden in her character file.
Who are you? I can't see you, but I know you're there. Yeah, you can definitely hear me. You've been watching for a while now, right? It's time to be a hero. Both of us.
That's not to us, it's to him, Ive. How do I know? Let's look a bit closer at Ive. Ive is an interesting character throughout the files that the new game gives us. We've seen a few emails from him as well as seeing him mentioned in a few meeting notes. His writing style is casual, he uses phrases like OMG and types things like ha ha ha. Other Team Salvato members mention that Ive makes meetings go on for too long. He also seems to be obsessed with interacting with the VM1 simulation. Obsessed with making it into a game. Quote from
See, what I don't understand here is why is it that with all the research you did, you missed something this obvious, Pat? Ive Laster is actually the person who was trying to turn that version of the VM into a dating sim. The rest of the team found out, or Monica's sentience kicked in, or both, so he never got to finish, which then meant Monica never got her happy ending in the game, and that's what made everything else happen in that version of the virtual machine, which is why they're abandoning it.
When you look at Meeting Notes 3. Obviously, Meeting Notes 3 comes after 1 and 2, so comes later in the timeline, but it has a few things that felt odd to me. Quote, fifth entity in VM1, not part of original genetic model, not present in data dumps, very bizarre.
He was less talkative because he's the one who created the player character, and he probably got more than a little disturbed when she started getting quite attached to his player character. I also discovered a bit of a continuity error when it comes to the meeting notes and the emails, because the emails are all dated for 2019, but the meeting notes and all the other files had a date of 2021, which means, help? That's kind of a giant continuity error there. I don't know if anyone else has got the same problem. Check the files for the game for yourself in the meeting notes. See if the same problem is there for you. There's also another email which Pat completely ignores, which is written by Paula Miner, which talks about ethics. The ethics being, isn't it kind of messed up that you're basically messing around with the psyches of basically artificial intelligences, but their argument is pretty much boils down to they're not real, therefore there's not an ethics problem. But you can read the email for yourselves. I will also come back to that point in a little while.
His tone has changed here. Wanting to be in a meeting about results, straight to the point, no abbreviations or ha-ha-ha's, his tone feels off. but I couldn't quite figure it out until I looked at the subject heading, have
Now,
enough.
this is the part of the theory where Patt's theory jumps the shark. At most, I've might have said that after seeing Monica put it in one of the game files when things start going a bit screwy, like he did it without even thinking about it. But this whole theory of Monica's possessing people's bodies, just how? How would you do that? There's nothing in this universe yet which implies that. The closest thing to that we could possibly have is this whole obsession with the third eye and trying to take full control of the metaverse or whatever universe that you are inhabiting within. Again, this is where the lore gets incredibly confusing because it's a metaverse, there's potentially multiple universes, therefore potentially multiple copies of the character, which is probably the most likely thing. There are multiple copies of their universes on these computers and multiple copies of the characters. But that still doesn't explain how one of them would manage to get into a human being. Not to say it won't ever happen in this series that's going to come in the future, but at this point it seems a bit jumping the gun. Now, I admit the phrasing is a bit deliberate, but I think that's to throw people off a little bit, and I'll explain a bit more why that is in a little bit. But I have people at my job who say have a nice weekend to me, and they sometimes put it in emails too. Do I need to think they're being inhabited by AIs taking over their brain? It's a normal goodbye for a week. They are throwing down some red herrings in here, and I'll show you an example of another one.
In other words, Monica has escaped. And if that weren't enough, there's yet another entity that we have to be on the lookout for. One coming from the other side, Project Libitina, an entity named Marla. But more on her and the horrific experiments that are happening over on VM2 next time.
But I haven't said everything yet, and also we're not done because here comes video number 2.
But there was still one major thing that we didn't have time to talk about, and that was Virtual Machine 2, otherwise known as VM2, or perhaps most infamously of all, Project Libitina. Now, if you pursue Yuri as your romantic partner in the main game of Doki Doki, she describes the plot of the book that she's reading, The Portrait of Markov, a book which has an ominous-looking eye symbol on the front cover. In the first act, Yuri makes it sound relatively innocent. Quote, basically it's about this girl in high school who moves in with her long-lost younger sister, but as soon as she does so, her life gets really strange. She gets targeted by these people who escaped from a human experiment prison, and while her life is in danger, she needs to desperately choose who to trust. In the second act, she gives us even more information. Basically, it's about this religious camp that was turned into a human experiment prison. All the people trapped there have this trait that turns them into killing machines that lust for blood, but the facility gets even worse, and they start selectively breeding people by cutting off their limbs and affixing them to, and then she cuts off. Great date conversation there, Yuri. The name itself, Libitina, appeared to be a reference to the names of one of the original test subjects, who, based on details from a medical spreadsheet found at projectlibitina.com, seemed to most closely match the physical details of Yuri herself. Hidden amongst all the documents, there were also references to a sick and suffering girl named Alyssa, as well as to an antagonistic character who seemed to be either a priest or doctor named Renier. Ultimately, we concluded that this was leading to the next game in the series, where we, or Monica disguised as someone, or whatever, would be tasked with saving the Doki Doki girls from these horrific experiments.
Now, the Project Libitina stuff is where things get a bit more interesting here, because one of the very first things I thought about this updated version of the game is, are there any actual real people who have this third eye ability? Has it been something that's been cultivated? Has it been something that's been scientifically experimented on? Or are they all artificial intelligences in some attempt to try and induce this into a real person? Which then causes all kinds of confusing problems of, is Project Libitina and Portrait of Markov the same thing? There's a question I don't think anyone's asked yet. Because we've got two things going on here. You've got one group of people who are basically trying to evolve human beings to induce this kind of extra third eye mental ability, and you've got this other story which basically seems to be about turning people into serial killers with various people's body parts attached to them. Are they the same thing, or are they two separate things happening at the same time, one influencing the other. Like, is the only reason the Portrait of Markov exists because it's a computer-based environment to perform experiments on those artificial intelligences and there not be an ethics problem?
It sounds ridiculous, but if they actually get somewhere with it, then we might have a solid entry point that doesn't heavily intrude upon the VM. The VM will just be named Test VM for now, although the parallel access unit they're building in the VM seems to be called Project Libitina. And there it is, ladies and gentlemen, Project Libitina in the flesh. Kinda, and there's a lot of flesh involved. Now, if you're a bit confused by what all of that means, hang on, we're about to break this wide open. You see, once you collect 100% of DDLC Plus's files, you unlock the final reward, Test VM, Paula's new name for Virtual Machine 2, the one that houses Libitina, which means that finally, after all the years of teasing and theorizing, we get our first glimpses into this new world, and it's a bunch of text. It's a text doc. We're welcomed by a black screen that shows us trying to connect to VM2. Remember, they still haven't come up with a stable connection to this world, which is why most of the text appears as random symbols. However, each time you boot things up, you see a fraction of text before losing the connection. Sometimes you're lucky enough to get a full sentence, other times it's just half a sentence, or two halves of different sentences. After hundreds and hundreds of reboots, online DDLC fans have collected all the pieces of text, and well, it's pretty random. It's kind of like assembling a bunch of dinosaur bone fragments. Some pieces fit clean.
Actually, what they did was they hacked into the game itself, even though Dan Salvato said you didn't need to, but they did hack into it anyway. It's because otherwise you could spend forever trying to find all the bits of information.
Project Libitina and VM2's simulated world. Let's take a look. Right off the bat, it becomes clear that there are three very distinct writing styles present in the text that Test VM spits out at us. One that appears to be heavily religious, one that's entirely scientific, and a third that's rooted in science but seems to be a bit warmer or more personal. We know that this game is big on writing styles and grammar, and so the way that these sentences are worded to me indicates that we aren't just reading text from one person, but instead are reading from three different sources. First, the religious writing, probably from a priest-like character. We learned from Yuri in the original DDLC that this was a religious camp that turned into a human experiment prison. We also know that God clearly plays some part of Project Libitina thanks to the testing file at projectlibitina.com. Quote, "Will you not have as much faith in your personnel as you do in your God?" So we've guessed for a while that Project Libitina has religious roots, but what they're worshipping and what their goals are is made more clear from the decoded messages in Test VM. Gradual changes to the scripture class curriculum to incorporate an angel in mortal skin. She will walk the path to ascension and we will follow. We'll ascend and bring salvation to all. May the third eye can only assume that even obstacles or failures are all part of the great plan, even if beyond my comprehension. Should seek purpose. Purpose ignites a will to live, a will to suffer for have died, so that those most worthy will be able to ascend. That first line confirms the idea that this is some kind of religious camp. There's a curriculum. People are being taught, which is often a part of cult life, allowing them to essentially brainwash the victims. The writer also has some level of awareness that the world they're in is not all there is. There's a push towards ascension. Wait,
now how wildly different this all is compared to Doki Doki Literature Club is both the most interesting thing, but also what makes all of this kind of strain to be able to be coherent. And part of that's because we don't know everything yet. Like, where did all these artificial intelligences for characters come from in the first place? Who made these virtual worlds that they get put into? Is this team that's sending the emails the original creators, or are they just some kind of observers or people who found the code and they're going to play around with it as they please, not realizing what they're getting themselves fully into? But the fact of the matter is, all of this, and I do mean all of this, is by design. They want to give you information, but not so much information that we can figure everything out yet, which will keep us invested long enough to wait it out until the next game comes out. Even though it might turn into another Five Nights at Freddy's I'm here for the lore situation, which I think would be a shame if that happened.
So could this priest also be the doctor that we learned about in the test notes from the first game? Quote from there, "Libitina has not yet recovered from the termination of XXXXX and is not expected to do so in the near future. You are choosing to avoid the measures necessary to prevent a repeat scenario, Doctor. Will you not have as much faith in your personnel as you do in your God?" Makes sense, right? Willingly testing and killing patients, believing them to not be worthy in the pursuit of the perfect specimen that'll help them achieve the goal of ascension, an angel in mortal skin. My theory is that this mystery character, this priest/doctor doing all this writing, is Renier, the guy that we heard about from the redacted poem found in the original DDLC. In that redacted poem, poem, we see the writer describe Renier's information to be a complete and utter lie. However, Renier himself seems convinced of his methods and is associated with screams of torture. Both Renier and this first character in Test VM seem to believe that their sacrifices are worth it, that in order to ascend to a higher plane, you gotta crack a few eggs. Or, in actuality, selectively breed a bunch of children, sever a bunch of body parts, assemble it all into a giant psychic machine so you can reach your greater computer programmers. That is as reductive as I can make this whole situation. The next group of text that I want to show you gives us a far deeper, more detailed understanding of what exactly is going on inside Project Libitina. Indicates only 80% or less of nutrients and medical supplements are needed to keep the body alive, compared to the non-amputated control. Meters in diameters, so that a 0.5 meter gap between each body will... Due to the factual style of the writing, as well as the use of measurements and percentages, this text seems to be a research report. And it reaffirms what Yuri was talking about in Portrait of Markov, cutting off limbs and putting them all together for some purpose. And now we understand. It seems like they're combining body parts of those with strong third eye potential in order to ascend, to reach that higher plane of existence. To them, they're pulling their resources to reach out to their god, their creator, but we know better. They're not wrong about reaching out to their creator, but he ain't some dude hanging out in the clouds. He's a bunch of people chatting it up over Discord. And we already know that for as disgusting and horrible as their tactics are, it's also kinda working. Their experiment will indeed allow Team Salvato to reach back out to them. Think back to what Paula said in her email. I have an idea on how to increase connection stability. Some of the log files indicate attempts of theirs to pull together the access potential of multiple individuals into a single parallel unit. One angel blessed with the ability to communicate with God. The rest of the text from this section gets really dark. Quote, all have functional reproductive systems. Then we could produce new, potent children with incredible efficiency. And sudden death would be at 9 months each, a total of 36 would reach peak efficiency, with about 1 week per. By age 5, children testing above the threshold will be transferred to Wing A, while all are speculated to improve third eye potency by puberty. The new children are generally obedient, but with the introduction of more unpleasant activities, we should consider tests focusing on each of these emotional responses to determine which adulthood to receive professional training in. They are actively breeding children to have greater third eye potential, being raised in the facility, and eventually
in this universe that's very obsessed with multiple universes or multiverses, it seems a little bit too convenient that these coder programmer researcher types of Team Salvato are performing these ethically questionable experiments, and one of the virtual machines is also doing very questionable ethical experiments. They might have more in common than Dan Salvato is willing to tell us right now. But this is why I keep going back to my theory of someone who started all of this is after Neo from the Matrix-like power. And the safest way for them to do something like that without somebody interfering with their plans was first to create some kind of artificial intelligence and experiment with that to death before you try doing it in your own universe.
Science tells them. I am disregarding. The only prison is our material world. The gate of the Nexus extends beyond any comprehension of the material world. Name implies death, but of what? Only the material self. Our mission to become free of the material self is distanced from the religion which the Academy was once known to practice. Religion requires faith. This is undeniable truth. The observable changes in physical appearance, however small, already prove this to be more than the usual spiritual nonsense. Now this tells us a lot. The religious cult is called the Academy, but clearly things have changed in recent times. We're seeing, through the eyes of this character, the transformation of the Academy from an entirely religious venture to a scientific experiment. This view, however, is not accepted by the public. Again, as we read, it's implied that years of reputation have been washed away by their belief in the potential of the third eye, and that those with third eye potential do seem to have some subtle physical difference from normal humans. These lines of text also tell us that the ascension that they're trying to reach, our world, is called the Nexus in their world. And there's even more text coming from this individual, all about a mysterious new figure. Has become an increasingly scientific endeavor thanks to absolute genius and has made incredible contributions to Project Libitina, despite having no third, have given him the title of Guardian to reflect. This implies that our writer does indeed have a third eye, and that those without third eye potential are seen as lower class. However, this mystery person that the text mentions, this Guardian, has helped a lot despite not having a third eye. Again, I think that this is them talking about Renier. Renier seems to be our main antagonist in this new story, the one who created created the third eye theories in the first place and the quote-unquote science to test it all out. Well, I purposely didn't group Monica together with the other 3 girls for a specific reason. I don't believe Monica is part of Project Libitina like the others are. Instead, Monica is a nurse. The same nurse, in fact, that wrote the redacted poem that ends up in DDLC. Think about it. A nurse would have access to all the girls, the facility, the areas that she might need to go to in order to save them. But also, that redacted text in the poem leaves the words, "nothing is real," implying that it's been messed with by Monica to let you know that she knows about the simulation. But the real kicker goes all the way back to Paula's email, "Let's Move On." We established in the last email that monitor kernel access is how Monica got her name. It also refers to her level of elevated access in DDLC. Well, in the next paragraph, Paula states, quote, "I'm gonna spin up a read-only hypervisor that we can use to test different ideas like this. The elevation level will be set to monitor adjacent runtime level access. MARLA, Marla, the name of our nurse, and it's the name of Virtual Machine 2's Monica variant. That runtime level access, by the way, is important. It means that in this game, this version of Monica isn't gonna be all-knowing or all-powerful. She's just a nurse that's scared for these girls. And although she might not know the bigger picture, our Monica does. This is even hinted at by another line of text from the scientist in the test VM. But my third eye shows me 2 of them I can't make sense of. So now that DDLC Plus has introduced the metaverse, I think this new game, whatever they decide to call it, has a couple options open for how it might end up playing. First, we might be jumping in and out of the game, using Marla's runtime level access to help Sayori, Yuri, and Natsuki inside the new simulation Project Libitina, while using the metaverse desktop to edit, move, and delete files and computer settings with the help of DDLC's Monica posing as Ive, even helping.
I really don't understand where you get this idea from. It could literally just be a case of I feels guilt and now he's trying to help Monica. Why this extra wild stuff?
Earn their trust without tipping the scales or scaring them away to tell the authorities. Or maybe there's option 3. It's a normal game that shatters into something completely different when you name a character Monica, Yuri, Natsuki, and Sayori. Who knows? There are just lots of different directions to take the idea. Just be on the lookout for any games about human experiments, angels, ascension, or people named Marla. Those will be our first clue. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.
The way Doki Doki's constructed at this point is there's so many Easter eggs and everything at this point that it's hinting at lots of different possible things, but they're not giving you the full answers. So there's a lot of different possibilities that could happen. Who made those virtual machines in the first place? And more importantly, why? What I honestly think is the company that's maintaining these programs of like alternative universes is not as innocent as it seems. I think they might even be part of the cult themselves. This is building layers and layers and layers and layers of interesting little clues, but also just more questions that we might not ever even get answers to. But at the moment, honestly, my theory is I think the people who made these programs in the first place are part of that cult, that they think the world they're living in is some kind of matrix. Basically, the Matrix is the easiest way to describe it. They think they're in the Matrix. The reason they are doing all of that is in some strange, twisted attempt to try and give them, like, Neo-Matrix-like powers. I don't think Patt's correct, though, but Patt does stuff like this all the time. He'll put a bunch of clues together, then he'll come up with some wild theory, oh my god, poggers at the end. But he very rarely gets it right. He almost never gets it right until almost everything in a universe has been put together already, and then he figures it out. But you'll notice something else with Patt as well is when he makes theory videos and he gets it wrong, he just moves on to the next one. He very rarely even acknowledges the fact that he got it wrong last time. And I imagine that's because if he did do that, he'd probably have a lot less viewers on his videos than he does. I'm not throwing shade per se. I'm just pointing out that fact because it's a smart marketing thing to do. You don't lie, but you also withhold information sometimes. There's a reason that one of his catchphrases is, but that's just a theory, a game theory. Because a theory is basically an idea you have that you're trying to put a case together to try and prove whether or not it's real or not. And even then it can still be wrong. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of how Patt makes his videos is he's not trying to be correct, but he is trying to get you thinking in ways that you wouldn't think otherwise. He's good at what he does, that's all I can say. The fact of the matter is, Doki Doki Literature Club Plus is crawling with Easter eggs no matter where you look. and it's intentional, and they're not even all useful. This game has come out in an age where games full of Easter eggs already exist, so this is not exactly a new concept, and I'm not knocking it for that. I'm just saying you need to bear that in mind with the way they've approached some of this. For example, when you first boot up the game, it pretends to boot up like you're inside a computer, or a virtual machine, whichever terminology you want to use. When you do that, you will find there's actually a code ID that appears on the screen. If you put that code ID into a hexadecimal converter, you get the word Monica and a bunch of other gibberish letters and characters of various different kinds. Except it's not actually gibberish characters, it's actually the code ID for a YouTube video. So then you punch that code into a YouTube web address and then you get... Do you see what I mean? Am I painting the picture here yet? Do you see what I mean? This is something brands and their universes that they tell stories in figured out a long time ago, which Doki Doki is also using now. When their lore got so complicated that you ended up with different continuities of the same characters and the same world. By using a multiverse, you can have a bunch of red herring clues in there, which actually don't mean anything at all. They might be just there just to throw you off the scent. This is like one of the ultimate series right now for Easter eggs which could mean absolutely nothing. And it's a very clever way to keep people both invested but also cover your tracks so you don't have continuity problems, because then you can just say, oh, that's just from another universe, that's not relevant here. So, in conclusion, it seems like Doki Doki is about to get a metric crap ton of new lore in the future, because there's clues in this game which are very clearly unfinished and incomplete, and the only way to answer those questions is probably going to be through some future game they're working on. And I honestly don't know how I feel about that, because I felt like Five Nights at Freddy's overstayed its welcome, and Doki Doki might fall down the same fate rabbit hole, I guess you could call it. What makes Doki Doki so interesting to me was it was almost like lightning in a bottle. No one saw it coming, it just kind of blew everyone away at the time, and I don't know how you can do that more than once and it have the same effect on people. Everyone's mind got blown, it was like some amazing magic trick at the time, and now everyone knows the trick. How can you do that more than once? What is there left to do? Will I play the next new game? I don't know. Guess we'll just have to wait and find out. Thank you for joining me once again. Again, I reiterate, Patt makes some really good videos. If you like this video, I won't be doing serious videos on this channel anymore. You want to go and follow the Digibunker channel, and that's all I have to say for now. Thank you for joining me for this long. You're awesome. Okay, thanks, bye. See you later.